Hello and welcome to Project Insight's Professional Development Series. Today we have part 2 of 5, designed to help you manage projects with greater success. Today we're going to be covering stakeholders. We're going to keep our pleasantries to a minimum as we have a lot to cover, but a few housekeeping items. Everyone will be on mute. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat. In fact, feel free to say hi there now, maybe where you're from. I'm in Phoenix. This session is valid for 1 hour of PDU. You'll receive a link with that before the end of the week. The trick is you've got to stay until the end of today's session, though. Let me introduce you to our experts. First, we have Steve West. For more than 2 decades, Steve has helped thousands of organizations better make their work life easier through project management as the founder and CEO of Project Insight. Project Insight is an award-winning project management online tool. Our mission is to automate your work, unify your data, and make your life easier. If you're not currently using our platform, please reach out. We'd love to work with you. With Steve, we have Diane Buckley-Alwies. Diane has more than 3 decades of project management experience throughout multiple industries. She's an accomplished author, speaker, volunteer, consultant. We are extremely fortunate to be learning from you both today. Hello and welcome.
Hello.
Thanks,
How
Matt.
are you? Hey, Steve. How are you? Thanks, Matt.
We're doing great. Thanks.
All right. So we ready to go?
Yeah, we are.
Back from Memorial Day, and thanks everybody for their service. For those that have served our country. So, but back to work on a Wednesday afternoon, right? So today, as Matt stated, we are in session 2 of a 5-session program, and today we're going to be talking about stakeholders. As you all know, stakeholders are needed for our projects, and what we're going to talk about today is how we can define those stakeholders better, identify those stakeholders, make sure we're covering and addressing the needs of all of our stakeholders, putting a plan together to manage those stakeholders, because they don't just support your project by default. It does take work to manage your stakeholders, to keep them informed, and then recognize when we have potential poor communication, because a lot of much of a project manager's day is around communicating, and the importance of communicating to your stakeholders cannot be understated. And then, so we'll put together a plan for communicating with our stakeholders. So, Steve, how are you doing today? You ready to go?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So, the first thing you want to do when you have your project is to ask the questions, like, who are the people that want this project? Who are the people that benefit from it? Who are the experts that I need to work on this project? Who's going to be affected by the project? Who are the customers of whatever we're delivering, and who outside the organization might be affected. Now, people can be affected both positively and negatively. And so it really is important that as you start your project, you take the time to brainstorm and determine who are all of your stakeholders, because it's not just the chief operating officer, or it's not just the direct customer. There's a lot of people that are impacted by your project, and they're all stakeholders, except for they're all different, right? So you have to kind of take the time and maybe do some brainstorming sessions. You might learn from prior similar projects to find out who were the people or entities that are your stakeholders. And you have to definitely think about who's impacted. Org charts are a great place. Past projects are a great place. Asking your executives in your organization, asking your customers, because who you're talking to at the customer may not be the only stakeholders. There could be others. And what do you think drives that value of a stakeholder? Why are we concerned about determining all those stakeholders? Any thoughts? Go ahead, Steve.
I think that normally you'll know the obvious stakeholders, someone who's asking you to do the project, your boss's boss. Those are easy ones. And I think what you're referring to here is figuring out who all the other stakeholders might be. Like, maybe you're implementing a new system and your boss is having you do it, but the stakeholders are the end users at the end of the day. Those kinds of people are, if you're doing a project for a client, the client's the stakeholder, but then the client's clients are the stakeholders too. So definitely, uh, the time that you're talking about brainstorming is to try to figure out who else that that isn't obvious is going to be
Right.
what we need to who we need to communicate with.
Yeah, one of the things I find a lot in talking to project managers, like they know the scope of the project. They
Right.
might understand, why are we doing this project? And as we talked about in the last session about the charter, but thinking about who's truly impacted by the project is a different step, is a different level of understanding. So to your point, if you're implementing a new system, you might be dealing with your peer project manager at that vendor
Mhm.
organization, but the people that are actually going to use that system are definitely stakeholders, and you have to be thinking about that. One of the I don't want to say industry, but initiatives that you hear a lot about now is all about user experience, customer experience. Everybody hears that today.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
15 years ago, that wasn't the case. It was about how do we use technology to be more efficient. It wasn't about user experience. So now you hear a lot of, when we implement a system, it's not just about getting the productivity gains. It's about, do people like to work on it?
Right.
So you really need to think through, and it does change. It changes over time. I mean, I've been in this, doing projects for a long time, and things have changed. And I'm even working on a UI UX project right now, which it I'm anxious to see how it all comes to play, because it's a system that's been around for 20 years, and we're going to be changing the whole UI UX. So
Ooh.
we'll see. But again, who are our stakeholders?
That sounds
It's
like fun. I want to
everybody,
help.
yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
was just gonna say,
everybody
talk
that's our
about
legacy
stakeholders though,
clients
right?
as well as the
Yeah.
new clients.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Well, it's tough sometimes to do that. I mean, we've had that here just with our own tool, just having we reimagined it just recently, and tried to make sure it was backward compatible and forward compatible. But I was
Mhm.
getting back to the whole stakeholder thing. I think not knowing it's the stakeholder you don't know or that you don't identify that can really submarine the whole project. And so that's why you really want in your case the UX. Your stakeholders are the clients that your customers had for 20 years, right? You don't want to make
Right.
them upset, but at the same time, you can't just hold the whole system back. They have to move forward into the next decade.
And we have users that might be aging, where you have a
Mhm.
whole new population of young people coming in that are a lot more tech savvy, so it does change.
Yeah,
So it's not a simple concept to determine who your
right,
stakeholders are. And
right.
you bring up a very good point. We're going to talk about that, and I would love to hear any stories that people have. You can certainly go into the
Mhm.
chat, because there's
Sure.
different types of stakeholders. As the ideal one obviously is the one on the right, the cooperative one. That stakeholder is involved in the project in an appropriate way. They're helping you, break down barriers and escalate things as necessary. But there's a lot of other kinds that cause projects challenges. Like I think you mentioned one that I would consider a detached one. Somebody that doesn't get involved until the last minute.
Right.
And then all
Until
of a
they don't like it.
sudden, boom, they're there, and they're like, well, this isn't done, and this isn't done, and this isn't done, and this. Well, that's a error on the part of the team, that they didn't identify that stakeholder and realize, and maybe try to get them more engaged throughout the process.
Hmm.
Then there's the unrealistic one. How many people have had the unrealistic one? It was, why can't it do everything? But I want to do everything now.
Well,
um,
sometimes that's me. I'm the unrealistic one sometimes because you just want so much to be done when you're building a new feature. It's like, oh my
well, yeah,
gosh.
my husband says anything can be done with time and money, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a balancing act, right? What is it that you want to have done with the time and money you have? So that's where that realism comes in. And then you got the people, initially people think, every stakeholder is going to be for the project. What happens if they're not? Like, think about projects in your community where maybe they're putting a new bridge in across some nature preserve. Well, the bridge may be needed to alleviate traffic, but it might be destroying the the natural look of the area. So you're going to have people that are opposing stakeholders as well. So it's not a simple formula. So once you have that big old brainstorming list, then you want to start thinking and try to categorize these stakeholders. And we look at two different factors in categorizing stakeholders. We look at interest and we look at power. So first, when we talk about assessing stakeholder interest, how will they benefit? What will work to the detriment of each stakeholder? So what are the things that they don't want to have happen? What's their attitude toward the project? Are they for it? Are they against it? Are they neutral? Because I know myself, there's things that, I'm not going to worry about, right? I'm going to be neutral on. But then there's things that hit my hot button and I'm going to be very vocal and very, involved in, because I want to make sure that it works in my, in the way that I want it. So depending on the situation, and you can have two very similar projects with different sets of stakeholders, and you have to manage it very differently. What's the stakeholders' expectation of the project? What are their requirements? So you got to think through all of that, but you might have a laundry list of stakeholders that you have to work through and that you have to think about. And the first step is seeing whether or not they have an interest in your project. So I know we're going to be sharing the slides, so this might look a little bit small, but this kind of covers some of the things we talked about in the last session about your charter and how that all ties together. So in this particular example, we're talking about doing a children's charity, and this company, Best Consulting, wants to do some charity work, wants to do a fundraiser for this charity as part of their organization. It's not part of their revenue stream. It's just something that they want to do to kind of give back to the community. And so there's a lot of companies that have this kind of thing. So this brings out a lot of those uniquenesses of the different types of stakeholders and how you may assume that everybody in the organization is in favor of the project, but maybe that's not true. So in this particular case, they're wanting to increase their brand image. They're wanting to get out into the community, want to give back to the community. But they also, have a goal of $300,000 to raise. They want to get their employees more involved as volunteers, and to do that, they want to hold this annual fundraising event. So we're going to use that as an example for these stakeholders, so that you can kind of get a sense of how you put together a stakeholder plan and a communication plan for a variety of stakeholders.
Yeah, and we have a question out there: is how to best prioritize stakeholders. I'm guessing you're about to talk about that a little bit.
We will be. Yes, we are. So yes, think about those two concepts, interest and power. And we're going to get to that point. So the first, was there a comment?
No, I'm agreeing that, I'm just making sure that we let the audience know that we're going to answer that question.
Absolutely.
And thank you for the question.
Thank you. TJ. Please, everybody. And if you've got some fun stories, we'd love to hear them as well. So in this particular case, I have 5 of the executives or people that are involved in the project, as well as the 6th item is the community. So you want to list them all out. We want to understand, their role. We want to understand what groups they represent, because again, you're going to have representatives of different areas. You're not going to have everybody in an area. So somebody needs to be the spokesperson. And then you're going to have an attitude. Now, if you notice here, Mark Smith is the CEO, and we put him as neutral. He's supportive as long as sales projections are still met. So if you think about it, yes, he wants to give back to the community, but he doesn't want to do it at the detriment of the organization and the organizational goals. But he does have high interest. His attitude is neutral, but he has high interest. Okay. So he wants to make this happen, but, he wants to temper that. Tom, who is development or sales, he's got a very positive out because he's like sitting here thinking this would be great for us to find new prospects. But, I don't really want to get too involved in it. I don't want to get too involved in it. So my interest is low, but I'm positive on it. So you can see where it's like it may not always make sense, but that there's different components to it. Mary, who's marketing VP, she's just worried about the amount of staff resources she's going to have to use to get to it, but she's also interested in it. So there's things that are always competing, and you have to kind of think through that and document and validate it. So once we have that interest of those parties, we then want to look at their power. And what's power? What's power? What do you think power is, Steve?
So, someone who could kill the project has a lot of power.
That's true. That's true. So there's different types of power. There's like a legitimate power, like the CEO. That if the CEO is like, you can cut that, shut that down. They can kill the project. But there's also people that have expertise. So maybe there's somebody that maybe you're working with a consultant that has expertise, and you want to listen to them. So they might have more power than the administrative assistant that has a very high interest in the project, but doesn't have that expertise. So expertise is another kind of power. There's informal, power, like I respect you, Steve, you respect me, I think. But, so we want to work with each other. So that's an informal power. And if somebody strange comes into the mix, I'm probably going to align with you more than I would align with somebody new. And that's more of an informal kind of power. And then there's the power that's what they call referent, or just especially like in a charity event, I have a passion for something, so I'm going to want to put my time and energy into it because I have a passion for it. So there's different kinds of power, and so you want to kind of assess that for each of your stakeholders, and see what does their power potentially impact the project itself?
Yeah.
Could it be beneficial or detrimental to the project? Do they control resources? So that's a formal kind of power that, let's say that marketing manager, that marketing VP, if she has 10 resources and we need to get 5 of them and she's not too keen on the project, that could be a problem, right?
Yep.
And are any of these stakeholders that have high power critical to the success of the project? So again, there's lots of components to think through, but at least having the conversation or thinking through it with your team will help to better understand how to address those particular stakeholders.
Right. And we have another question in the field.
I was just going to say from one of our stakeholders, actually, right, Steve?
Yeah. The question is, do you want the stakeholders to be aware of each other, I guess, and how do they introduce themselves to each other?
Your project team are stakeholders as well. So, I don't think there has to be anything formal. Formal from an introduction standpoint. I think the formality has to be at least walking through and trying to identify who they are and why they're stakeholders. Because once you ever, usually when people understand the why,
right,
they're more inclined to kind of pay attention to it. So understanding why these individuals are stakeholders and where they sit from a power and an interest standpoint will help us get to the point of how do we want to communicate with them.
Yeah.
So from a power standpoint, we have our 5 users or 5 people as well. Over here on the right-hand side, we identified what that power is. And again, every project's going to be different. So just because somebody's a CEO doesn't mean they have high power. It could be the COO that's really, has this initiative to make sure that this gets done. and they're the ones that have the most power that can either cut or, cut the project or succeed with it. So putting that together kind of brings it and encapsulates it. Now, what am I going to do with it? Right. So that's where we get to the point where that one of our audience members had asked,
yes,
what do you do with this info? All right. So you have this little grid. And again, there's always, exceptions to the rule, but this is a nice way to think about how to best communicate with the various stakeholders based on their power and interest level. So for example, Tom, he's low interest, high power. And so in that particular case, we want to communicate less frequently because he does have low interest, but you want to communicate with them because if you don't, they could potentially, cut your project, right? So you want to keep them informed, but you don't want to go overboard. And you do want to give them a little bit of personal attention when, on occasion, and maybe it's once every quarter you go walk into their office. I don't know what that is, but these high power, low interest folks, they don't want to be bombarded with emails or text messages or Slack messages. They just want to be kept informed and make sure that things are on track.
Right.
If they're high power, high interest, these are the ones that are open to you communicating with them often. Right. And now you got to figure out what's the best communication method for them and make sure you give them that personal attention to get to them. I know a lot of people that would prefer email versus Slack messages versus, text messages versus something else. And you really do, as a project team, we have to adapt our communication to their preferred method. Squeezing it all into one wet method is not the best thing because you get the stakeholder frustrated. So you want to keep those stakeholders engaged. You want to keep them happy. And for the high power, low interest, they just don't want to hear too often, but they want to hear. And the high power, high interest want to hear often, but they want to hear in the method that they like to be communicated to. And then you can see from a low power, low interest,
just ignore them, right?
Kind of just monitor, encourage, it's like, okay. And hopefully you don't have low power, low interest people on your project team or
yeah. And I think the trick there is just to make sure that you're not, it's not about not informing them, but don't spend all your time in the lower left quadrant there.
Correct.
So this was a great exercise. It's a really nice way this is, I believe, a nice way to prioritize all of that. We do have another question out there too, is should you circulate responsibilities as part of project initiation to set expectations for the stakeholders? I'm assuming in that context of the stakeholders.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big proponent in transparency, right? So, don't be rude, right? Don't say, well, Mark is an a-hole, right? You don't want to be rude, but yeah, you want to circulate what you're doing. And this is how I'm going to communicate with each of these different types of stakeholders.
And actually, to a question to the group, are you doing anything to communicate differently with each different, stakeholder types? Do you differentiate currently? Are you communicating on different platforms as of now? Thumbs up, thumbs down on that, maybe?
Yeah, well, there's a lag, so we'll know in a little bit.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the lesson here is it is incumbent on the project team to communicate in the best way to the stakeholders to get the right results. And we are talking about influence, but I can't insert the whole conversation about influence into this 1 hour session.
Yeah.
But you're really kind of catering to their needs to make sure that they stay positive on your project, which then influences them to help support your project, versus irritate them, so I'll use that high power, low interest. If you send them text messages every day, you will irritate them. That's not what they want. And then they get a bad taste in their mouth about your project. So it's about influencing your stakeholders in a positive way, giving the information that they want when they want it.
And I think the tendency for most people is to just, I'm going to do one communication for everybody. That's the easy way to do it, but I don't know that, given the way what we're talking about, that's not always best.
No, unless everybody's in one quadrant, which
Right.
odds are it's not, right?
Right.
All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about communication planning. And, if we have, let's say the three of us, on a team, and we are having to communicate on a regular basis, we basically have three channels of communication: me to Matt, Matt to Steve, and Steve to myself. That's three. But when you talk about projects, it gets more complicated the more people you have involved. So the term is communication channel. And if I have four people, how many communication channels do you think I have for that project?
Is this one of those memes that you send out on Facebook and you have to answer the question?
Yeah, this
I'm
one's
not
not,
gonna
it's
get
not
this
too
right.
hard, right? Yeah.
It looks like 4, but it's
four, but it's not, and there's actually 6, so you got the blue to the orange to the black to the yellow, and then across the way. So there's actually 6 channels. So we started with 3 of us with 3 channels. 4 ends up being 6. How many do you think it is if you had 7? And now there's a formula for that. And it's basically N, which would be the number of people, times N minus 1 divided by 2. So when there's 4, the answer is 6. How many channels are there for members of 7? Let's see who gets the answer.
Is that a question for me?
No. Let's see if anybody gets the answer.
Let's see if I'm in chat.
Huh? See if somebody can get the answer real quick.
Yeah.
But it's not 4.
I don't know.
It's not 3. So any answers? I don't see anything. All right. Well,
but 7 times
21.
6 divided by 2.
It's 21.
Yeah.
Right. So it's 42 divided by 2, which equals 21. So you go from 3 team members. There you go. Somebody got it. 3 team members to 4 team members, which is 6 channels. 7 team members, you have 21 channels. So now, you talk about how much more complicated it is to communicate in a project of 7 people than a project of 3 people. So one of our questions we want to ask the group, now that you've done the math, I see the 21s popping up.
Yeah.
To do the math on your own team. How many team members do you have? And who's got the highest score? So let's see.
And the reason you're talking that's the formula is because any 2 individuals at any time could be talking to each other.
Correct.
Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm on a nonprofit board, and we increased our board membership from like 12 to 18. And then people are like all worried about, why is it so hard for us to stay in touch? I'm like, because we just increased, the number of people on the board. And, there ends up being more miscommunications. There ends up being more communication that you have to have and repeat yourself more times because somebody didn't hear something, right? So understanding that the larger the team, the amount of communication channels you have to do, it grows significantly the size of your project.
Mm-hmm. Which means basically there's more opportunity for things to get off the wheels to fall off.
Right.
Yep.
And that goes into our whole communication model for anybody. What?
I was doing all the 21. I've got 21, right? On average, a project I'm on is about 7 people. So I have all these 21 different places that can go haywire, right? If I'm not better modeling what I need to be doing here.
Absolutely.
That was the crazy hands.
Yeah, that was I saw those crazy hands. So the bottom line, model here is understanding the communication model, because it's not one to many, it's one to one. It's I'm sending the information to whoever the receiver is. The receiver has to listen to it, understand it, and absorb it, And the best way to know that they've actually understood what I've sent is that they respond back. So if you have to do that 21 times for a team of 7, because even if you're in a meeting and you got 21 people in meet, not all of them actually received it and understood it well, right?
Yep.
So I always tell people, like, when they come to me and they say, oh, I sent them an email. I'm like, and did you follow up with it? Did you, make sure that they understood, or do you just send them an email and expect them to do what you asked them to do? It doesn't always work that way. So you really have to understand that this communication model, when we're talking about doing a communication plan for stakeholders. And like I said, the receiver will not hear or understand everything you said. And every individual communicates differently and prefers specific type of communication. So those are just like basics you got to realize. Nobody's going to change for you, right?
Serious.
And even on these webinars, I mean, this is why we ask questions. This is why we want the audience involved, so that we can make sure that people are understanding the concepts and are absorbing what they are and getting the information they're asking for out of these webinars. So if we just sat up here and just talked and shut off without asking for any input, that wouldn't necessarily be, the best way for us to communicate the message we want to communicate, which is, how do you better manage your stakeholders?
Yeah, right. Well, and plus nowadays it's just more complicated with all the different ways people use the tools that people use to talk to each other, texting and
my biggest
messaging
frustration now
platforms,
is
email. Yeah.
I was gonna say my biggest. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I want to hear it.
I was gonna say my biggest frustration is, where did I send that message on?
Oh, yeah.
Was I in text, Slack, email, the wiki page? I mean, when did I send that? And did I put it on notes? Did I send it out? There's way more ways to communicate today than there were before. And it's just more complicated.
Well, I definitely think in the beginning of a project, you should try to identify the ways you are going to communicate to this team, so that you get them on, last thing you need is somebody to think that you're going to send a message through Microsoft Teams or something like that, and you're just not using that, or they expect everything via email when you're really just using Microsoft Teams the best you can. So there is a little bit of give and take, I think. I mean, but internally in your internal stakeholders for sure. And then of course, if you have a high power, maybe your high power stakeholders, someone who's older and they don't, you have to call them, so it's best to know.
Well, and even on Project Insight, you have the ability to allow, other external stakeholders to come in and look at status, right?
Yeah. I mean, we have a client view, and we have ways, and we also have executive views and reports, but maybe your boss doesn't use a computer, so the tool does help a lot because it can save you time, but that doesn't mean that just because you post it somewhere doesn't mean that that's the right thing for every situation.
Right.
And I think that's the point of what we're trying to talk about here.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into some of the features of Project Insight for statusing and things like that. But let me just kind of get through this one little slide, and we can talk through that.
Sure.
But yeah, from just tips for communicating effectively. Put your hands down when you're on a call and listen. All right. Don't try to multitask, because most of us can't do it. Make sure you're maintaining eye contact as best you can, right? I mean, a lot of us are on Zoom all the time now, but put the video on like we are here. It's like, seeing the person's face and really paying attention and being aware is critical. Even you can pick up some nonverbal signals, remotely and via Zoom. My biggest problem is when I finally meet somebody live that I've only been communicating via Zoom, they look different. And I don't know what that is, but 3-dimensional versus 2-dimensional, I don't know. But you can still pick up nonverbal skills, on a Zoom.
Yeah,
ask for feedback,
and I do like using the camera on the Zoom. That does help a lot. Even if the other people don't do it, if you're the project manager and you're the leader and they're not putting their camera on, and you probably should do it for your own benefit, even
and
if it's
if
awkward.
Yep. And even if it's even sometimes, if people aren't putting the camera on, I would be questioning whether or not they're really listening. Now,
Yeah,
granted, we're not going to put all, 80 people here on Zoom for this webinar, but in your project team meetings, absolutely, so you can at least see whether or not they're paying attention.
yep,
Um, the one bullet there, communicate in person in the person's preferred medium. Like I said, that's so critical on making sure you understand, especially when you're talking to executives and customers.
hmm
What you don't want to do is irritate them, and you want to, give them the information that they're asking for when they need it, how they want it, and using face-to-face meetings for difficult discussions. There, as project managers, there will be times when we have to have difficult discussions. Smaller, one-on-one, way better than trying to do things in a group.
hmm
You don't get the right impact, and being direct and sincere. So again, this is typical. Nothing surprising here on good communication skills, but I think over the last several years we've forgotten some of that because we've gotten so used to being on Zoom. And when people aren't paying attention, what happens, right? They don't hear something that they should have heard, and they make an assumption that they shouldn't have made. And then you end up with maybe that detached stakeholder, because you didn't take the time to get them engaged in those conversations.
yep,
Cool. So planning your communications, we've talked about this. I won't belabor this because I do want to get into some of the stuff from Project Insight. But
sure,
there's many different methods, and we've talked about that. So there's interactive, there's push, there's pull. We've got so many options out there to communicate nowadays than we did 20 years ago. Just have to try to pick the ones that work for you and your organization and leverage them in the best way. Don't
yeah.
pick all. That probably would make you lose all your hair if you try to manage all of them.
Yeah,
Right?
I do like the idea of in your beginning of a project, if it's a big project with a lot of stakeholders and resources, defining the methods that you're going to use as a team really will help.
Yeah.
And obviously, if there's a particular stakeholder, you can make an exception for one. But if everybody else is kind of on the same page, that'll really help.
Yeah, and Project Insight, you have the ability for alerts and things like that you can send out messaging. That's all methods of communication. Your schedule is a method of communication, right?
Definitely. Well,
But
yeah, definitely the software helps. And, again, like a phone is a piece of software.
mhm,
So, but do you really want your team texting you on your regular text? Should they just use Microsoft Teams, please? Should you, internally here at our company, we don't really use email internally. We've made it clear to everybody, hey, let's use Teams instead of email,
mhm,
unless it's to a customer because customers aren't necessarily always in your team. So when you start your project, it does help to define, you know, the channels you're going to use. We've talked about that before in a previous webinar as well.
I,
absolutely.
I actually just helped a team import as a part of their project charter to go back to the last session, right? It was communication method per stakeholder. How,
Yeah,
how are we going to communicate as a project, right? How does this person
that was
communicate?
an option on the charter, right?
Yeah. So
Yep.
we actually
Mhm.
imported as a custom item so that we can get it just right for what they needed. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
really.
yeah, absolutely. So after all that information that
Oh, there you
pulled
go.
together.
See, this is the slide I was looking for.
Ah, there you go. After all that information that we've collected, this is the result that you're looking for.
Right.
Here's your stakeholders. What is it they're interested in hearing about? How often do you want to send it to them? who's going to send it to them, because you always need to have an owner, right? And then how are you going to send it to them? So Steve, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about the status reporting and stuff within, because we do have a whole session on status reporting, but we want to kind of highlight a few
Sure. I
things
mean, we could
here.
show real quick if you
Sure.
switch to my screen, we can show
Can you do that
just,
now?
I believe I'm sharing, I think.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
So, in here, what you're looking at here is a status report that's part of our tool. It's in the views menu here, right at the very bottom, if you have the add-on enabled. Not every, again, you have to have this turned on in your workspace, but this is an example of an out-of-the-box status report that you can use to share to your executives, showing your progress, and then obviously like your health status and what type of project it is. Any notes, like in our tool, we recommend people putting the notes in. These are your status notes here, so they can just edit it right now or add another one. Then your milestones coming up in June and July, and then also a list of those milestones. Again, this is configurable, but this is one way that you can help communicate to people. I don't think that this in and of itself is just one tool. Other ways that you can collaborate with people is, also tagging them to say, if we need to have help in our tool, you can make comments on things and say, I need help, tag somebody, and that'll send an alert out. So these are just automations for that. The other report is we have a client view here, and right now I'm logged in as a client view. It's very similar, actually. I think I'm sharing just that window. Let me move my sharing real quick. Sorry about that.
So you can have a different view for the client than you have
Yeah,
for
the
internal.
portal itself is very similar. It's a little bit scaled
Yeah.
back, right? Because you don't need your external stakeholders to have, you can control the granularity
Yep.
level, but ultimately this is it.
Yeah, and I just switched to the client view tool. So if one of your stakeholders are clients, we have a free client view for the enterprise level. You can have this feature, and you can see any project that you are doing for that client would show up here, and then they can click on it here and see a very similar report to what I just showed you. These are tasks that are assigned to that customer. Issues, they can actually submit issues through this interface too, which is another way that you can help provide a way for your stakeholder to respond to you that's not just like call you up out of the blue. Like if there's a way for them to say, I have an issue, I want to log something, and you show them a way to log it, that helps you automate your work a little bit, because now you've got them kind of into a process that they can follow, and it makes them feel better about how to report things that they're finding out. But again, this is a client view where on a project by project basis, you can go in here and you can decide, do I want to show all these issues? Do I want to show all these risks? Do you want to show every single status comment? You can flag certain comments, certain risks, certain issues. It's all point and click. You just click on the things you want to share on the client view on each project, and that's what your customer will see. So those are just some ways
awesome.
software can help you do these things.
Yeah,
so you're not just an email.
Puts a lot of the theory into reality and how you can leverage a tool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, before software, you might just send the Microsoft project file and circulate it, or you'd have to write up a report all the time. The idea is like, if you're logging those issues and you're putting it into the tool, you don't have as much to do necessarily.
Well, it's one place, right? And then it cascades out through all the different mechanisms that we had, right? Our three buckets of communication. We can hit all three when you enter it in one spot, as opposed to the resync and circulation.
Enter it once and use it multiple times.
Exactly.
Awesome. Right. Absolutely. And I saw one of our audience members say, "Great!" So that's awesome. But yeah. So today's webinar is all about making sure we understand those stakeholders. And the reason we want to understand those stakeholders is so that we're communicating with them in an appropriate way to keep them engaged and make them cooperative stakeholders. So this is our second session of 5, and we will build upon this in a few more weeks, and we'll be talking about schedule. Any questions from the audience that we haven't covered?
Well, we have a couple more. Well, usually there's a little bit of a delay. I think
Who had the biggest number of communication channels? Did we
we
get
don't.
anyone?
We didn't get it. We didn't get any answer for that. We just got the answer for what the riddle was.
Nobody wanted to pull out their calculator, huh?
No. The good thing
That's
is you don't
awesome.
need to know the exact number. You just need to know if you have a
Yeah,
lot or a little.
no, it's high.
Yeah, and it gets more and more complicated as you grow.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I
Yeah.
like to keep meetings to small meetings, right, and very topical. You know, so that you're not.
Definitely.
What's the word? Is like the audience. There's only a certain amount of audience that's interested in the topic, so you don't want to have the wrong audience in the meeting that wouldn't be interested about the topic.
Do you have any war stories of where something went off, the wheels went off the rails from a stakeholder?
Oh, well, there's definitely the detached. That was definitely lessons learned early on in my career, where you get to the end and then all of a sudden somebody comes running in. It's like, this is not what I wanted, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, this is what's written down. That's not what I wanted.
So the detached one is maybe like the Trojan horse.
Right. And then you've got the unrealistic ones. I can name quite a few of those where
those are usually really obvious right out the gate.
Yeah. Why can't you do these 400 edits in the next week? Okay, sure.
I think sometimes the opposing can show up late. So people kind of just stay quiet, and then all of a sudden, you don't even know they're an opposer. And then all of a sudden you find out, oh my gosh, I have to deal with this person that's making this difficult.
Yeah, and sometimes the opposer, to your point, opposer isn't even part of your project. They're being impacted by it in a negative way, and they're not really involved.
Yeah, like again, like a software system. I mean, that's why I live in, so can't think of anything else. But software systems, classic one. Someone doesn't want to migrate off the tool they're using to a new version. I mean, that's a classic. You're going to get those opposers not wanting to do the new tool. Very common.
And that's why that's where change management's involved, right?
Yeah. But the detached person can become the opposer at the very end. Just boom,
absolutely. You can't assume that everybody's going to be a cooperative, involved in an appropriate way stakeholder. You really have to take the time to really understand those individuals and kind of figure out where they fit. And, one of the things we talked about is, sometimes you have to have difficult conversations. Like, why aren't you involved? Like, how can we get you more? What is it that your problem is? And you do those like one-on-one kind of conversations.
Yeah, that one's a hard one.
But sometimes we have to do that.
Yep. I guess we should move to the next slide to send off the PDU information for those of you guys who hung on there. Thank you very much. There's the code to get your PDU for the session.
Get it scanned with your phone.
Yeah. So this is all automated now these days, so it makes it a little easier.
Really?
All right, couple more webinars coming up. 5 keys to managing any project. That's schedules. We'll talk a lot intelligent scheduling, all the different ways to do that.
That's June 21st. July 19th, we're going to do status reporting and meeting. Risks and issues will be on August 16th. Please subscribe to the channel, follow us on social. We're very happy to have everyone here. Thank you both for all of the expertise, as always, that you guys bring to these webinars. It's
thanks,
wonderful.
Diane. No, it's always great. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for attending. And this will be posted on YouTube for those for reference later.